Hello, everybody, and welcome to the seventh Sponge Chat. I've been very busy this week, last week really, carrying out two of the Sponge Chats. It's been a lot of work, but it's been really, really interesting. And I think that today's Sponge Chat is going to be quite interesting for those of us that are currently teaching, looking to teach, or even have taught in Spain. I had the pleasure to sit down with Alan McDyre, who is the president of ACEIA, the largest language teaching association within Spain. He's also, I believe, a board member of FECEI, and so, you know, Alan knows what he's talking about when we talk about the teaching situation in Spain. And so this Sponge Chat was directed at teachers and also at directors, managers and owners of schools. We aimed to dissect perhaps one of the most confusing documents that there is. It's called El Convenio for our sector, which is basically a document that gives us the left and right of arc of what we can do. And we looked at teachers' rights and obligations and how these change depending on your position. And we also looked at some things that are important to the industry in terms of outlook after COVID and some advice for teachers that are either looking to work in Spain or who are working currently in schools that perhaps are not fulfilling their duties as employers. So make sure you do check us out. This is quite specific to Spain. So for those of you internationally abroad, you know, maybe you can find some useful information in this. I'd like to do more of these for other countries as well. So if there are any other professionals that really know the employment law in the context in which they're working, please get in touch and I'd be happy to do another one, okay? All right, guys, thank you very much. Enjoy. Please let us know what you think. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to get back to you. Don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and again, I'll see you again soon, okay? Bye. Hi, Alan. How you doing?
Hi, how's it going? Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's amazing to see you. I've seen before. It's been a little while. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here this morning.
Pleasure.
I think that the things that we're going to speak about today are really relevant. Obviously, we're talking about teaching in Spain. And so hopefully the stuff that we talk about this morning reaches a lot of teachers in schools and makes a difference. I mean, that's what I would like. I suppose the purpose of these Sponge Chats was, in general, is to look at different career paths in AOT. And today we're focusing specifically on Spain and maybe the situation in Spain, looking at some of the specifics of working in Spain and some of your thoughts and advice for teachers. Sure. Before we get into that, though, maybe we can look at you in a little bit more detail. Who is Alan? Is the question.
You're starting with an existentialist question,
right?
I'm from London. I came to Spain in 1987, so that's what, 34 years ago now.
Long time.
Started teaching in Cordoba for a while. I met my wife there, and we decided to set up a school, our first school in 1989. And then we followed up with our second school a couple of years later. And they've gradually grown over the years, and that's where we are now. In the meantime, in about 1999, I think it was, we joined ACEIA. ACEIA is the Association of Private Language Schools in Andalusia. And I gradually became more and more involved in that until I became president 4 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm also on the executive commission of FECEI, which is the National Federation. So yeah, I'm very involved in
I mean, you're
Everything.
basically involved in everything within the sector,
Well,
which is phenomenal.
yeah.
I suppose for those that I would imagine that ACEIA and FECEI would be very familiar to many teachers, but perhaps some teachers that are sort of recently arrived in Spain, thinking about working in Spain, or even are currently teaching in Spain, but maybe are not fully aware. What are these associations, and why are they perhaps important to our sector?
Sure. Well, there are 10 associations in Spain in different regions. The biggest one is ACEIA in Andalusia, and it's basically a trade body. It represents private language schools. So when we have to talk to the regional government or other administrations, well, they have to take us into account. There are now about 110 members with about 170 centres in total.
Wow.
And something like 3,000 teachers, if I remember rightly. I'm not sure about that, but something like that. And the functions of the associations is that to represent the sector, not just the members, but the whole sector as well.
Right.
And also to inform its members of any changes that are happening, legal changes or anything that's happening in the sector. Training is very, very important. We always talk about teacher training, but we also do training for management and for admin staff and commercial staff as well.
Right.
And the other important thing is just collaboration between the schools. Working together. Some projects are too big for one school to handle, so they get together.
Right.
And just sharing information, basically. I mean, it even comes to the point where, say, a student comes to school, wants, I don't know, a B2 class at 8 o'clock in the evening on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you haven't got one, you can phone another ACEIA school, they might have one. Right. So that sort of collaboration goes on.
Yeah. And so obviously there are quite a number of benefits for schools to be involved with that, not just at the teaching level, but as you mentioned, the management level, and I imagine working with other schools that have a certain level of experience at working with the sort of the Spanish legal system and running their schools. I imagine there are a set of requirements or requisites that schools need to meet before joining ACEIA or FECEI. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, you have to prove that the school is legally established. And we also look at contracts, pay slips. We talk about methodology, talk about best practice. So we go through all their paperwork. We also visit the schools.
Right.
Normally about 80 schools a year apply to be members, about 10% get in.
Wow. That's quite a low number that get accepted. I imagine that's... Sorry.
It's quite a sad number. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think it's kind of clear then that being part of these associations is not only good for the schools, but also for the teachers that work in these schools.
Yeah.
If that's correct, yeah.
Yeah. We do go through these things. We can make sure their contracts are legal. We make sure that the payments are correct. I can't guarantee it 100% of the time, all the time, but we do our best.
Excellent, brilliant. So before we look at maybe dissecting the notorious convenio and some of the finer points there, perhaps we could look at the teaching situation or the context of language teaching in Spain. I mean, before this chat, we spoke about looking a little bit at the history. We need to look at the history before we can understand where we are now. Would you like to sort of go through that briefly?
Well, I think people are very nostalgic about the halcyon days of TEFL in Spain back in the 80s and 90s, where it was we were very much on our own and it was great fun and stuff. I think one of the first, I think the changes started in the sort of early 2000s. In about 1998, I remember going to TESOL in Madrid, and it was the first time I saw the European framework being presented. And we were all very excited about that. And there were a number of other projects as well. I don't know if you remember the language passport, which was all part of it. That died a death. That never really got going. So suddenly we went from teaching beginners and then intermediates and upper intermediates and so on, to having something that people could turn into a product. So a B1 or a B2, something that they could grab hold of. And I can't remember what it was exactly. I think it was about 2004, 2005 that the government decided that graduates had to have a B1 to finish their degree. Now that was a key moment, of course, and that created a huge surge in the market.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that was great. We got busier and busier. And then the financial crisis hit, 2007, 2008. So a lot of people lost their businesses, decided to look to other types of businesses to invest in. And they came across this industry which was booming, practically the only one that was booming at that time, is relatively cheap to set up. You don't need expensive machinery or anything to set up a language school. Basically, you need a few chairs, tables, a few computers, and you're off. So that's when we saw a surge in a new type of investor, a new type of school that sought refuge in our sector, and they brought with them new working practices. They made, I think one of the changes, which isn't negative, is that they made this sector much more client-centered.
Right.
But at the same time, they brought practices when it that they're very competitive with price, very. I would say disrespectful of the profession in some ways. Well, we're not the only sector that suffered this sort of thing. If you ever next time you go to your dentist, you can talk to him about what's happened to their sector as well. Really? It's gone from being individual professionals to big franchises and so on. So, and something very similar has happened. So we found ourselves going from a big boom into a very much more competitive market. The market was saturated, and prices stagnated, salaries stagnated, and I think that's probably where we find ourselves now. Right.
Wow. And would you say that there are, obviously with coronavirus now, we're definitely not at the end of the pandemic, but maybe we can see some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
How has the language teaching industry within Spain suffered because of that? And what are the likely sort of repercussions, I think, for the future?
Okay. The data we have is that there have been some school closures.
Right.
Especially in these sort of low-cost schools that I was talking about, who didn't have funds to survive this crisis or to invest in the technology necessary to go online.
Right.
But within FECEI and ACEIA, 96% of the schools went online.
Wow.
And have survived.
That's brilliant.
And in terms of drops in students, probably around 5 to 10%. But they're coming back. They're coming back. So I'm fairly optimistic for the future.
Right.
And of course, the changes, the technology is really interesting. For years and years and years, people have been talking about online classes and virtual classrooms and stuff, and it looked like it was coming, but it never arrived, and then suddenly it did.
Boom.
Boom. Yeah, and we learned overnight, and it's quite surprising that in the surveys that we've done, people want to be back in the classroom, but it does give us a new flexibility. So for those adults who don't want to travel into class, they can. That option exists. So really, Pandora's box has opened, and we have new possibilities for a typical kids class. If a kid's at home sick, they can still come to class.
Somebody, right?
Yeah. So
I suppose in this way, we definitely think that the online language teaching world is not going to disappear now. It's sort of here to stay. You think that?
I think it's an additional tool. Yeah. I don't really know an awful lot about the online market, strictly online market. I've spoken to some teachers who are doing it, and they're not terribly happy about it, as far as I can see. But and I remember many years ago when people started talking about blended learning, the universities found themselves with a problem because people just weren't finishing those courses.
Yeah.
So they started doing psychological tests and only allowing certain people onto those courses because the performance was so low. But whether that's changed, I don't know.
Interesting. Looking at my context, speaking to my learners, this year we've had the mixture of being online. Now we're back sort of in-person classes. I'd say the majority, anywhere from 90 to 95%, prefer to be in the academy. But there are certainly some that say, no, I would like to stay at home. I don't have to come into the academy. I just relax, sort of thing. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where or how this online world is utilized over the next year or two.
Yeah, I think the social element is very important.
Yeah, I mean, even with regard to teacher training and development conferences, for example, I'm attending ACEIA TEFL next week, I think it is, and it's going to be online, and there's like a virtual world that you can go in apparently, but I still think there's you're missing. For example, the ACEIA conferences, you go there, you get to network. It's much more, I don't know, there's something that you miss by not being there. I don't know, that's my own opinion. That's my own opinion.
ACEIA did a virtual conference last October. It was a huge thing to do. We were all fairly new to it, and it involved, big IT infrastructure, television company, and stuff. And I mean, the talks were fine. The content came across well and so on. But yeah, you do miss that interactive networking thing. So for next year's conference, we're going to be using a different platform, which will allow people to interact in a very different way.
Right. Awesome.
And at the same time, we're hoping, if of course it depends on the virus, to have a real conference in Malaga next spring. So that
would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. Okay, let's so we've analyzed the sort of the teaching situation in Spain. If we can shift our attention maybe to the convenio and perhaps teachers' rights, and I suppose for many teachers they're looking, okay, we're watching this video, we want to learn about what are our rights in Spain. So
and obligations, of course,
and obligations, exactly. Yeah. So first of all, what is the convenio? What is this document?
Okay, well, when we talk about employment law, it's a little bit more complex than just the convenio, which is like the sort of rule book for our sector.
Right.
It's that employment law in Spain is multi-layered. It starts with the worker statute, which is the sort of generic thing for all employment law.
Right.
And then there's the specific agreements between the sector and unions for specific sectors. In our case, it's the Convenio Colectivo de Enseñanza No Reglada.
Right.
The first thing to say is that it's not designed just for language teaching. It's all non-regulated training. So it's not an ideal document. It's designed for people who are training people in IT or anything. And they're all very different. So it is fairly generic and it's far from ideal. But it's what we have. And it's what we have to adhere to when we create contracts and
right.
we're dealing with people.
So I suppose it's this fact that it's quite generic, that there are, I mean, we're going to go through some questions in a moment, but I imagine the reason why there are so many perhaps issues with its interpretation is because it's so generic. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
But there are some types of teaching or training that are like sort of masterclasses. You just roll them out.
Right.
That don't require very much preparation. Whereas language teaching, as we know, is different. It's usually sort of made to measure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are differences, and there are parts of it which are very vague and difficult to interpret, and it's down to the school basically to interpret.
Right, and I can see where the danger lies there. I suppose that's the good thing about being part of an association. Is sort of everyone sort of comes to an agreed upon standard, if you will. And yeah, well, let's go through some of the questions I have with it. I encountered this a little while ago and read over it, and it's all in obviously quite formal Spanish as well, which makes it even more difficult. But some of the points that came up that I think maybe will be relevant to teachers, but even to schools. So for example, it talks about personal docente, so in terms of like the teachers themselves, and that has a number of different classifications for teachers. Where do we as language teachers fit into this? Are we titular? Are we auxiliar? Or how does this work for us?
Well, okay. The only thing, well, as you say, there are a number of different categories and levels. The convenio says, okay, now strictly in legal terms,
right?
It says you can't have profesores adjuntos unless there's at least one profesor titular.
Right.
So there has to be one. And very often that would be the director of studies or the head teacher.
Ah, okay.
That's one way of interpreting it.
Right.
In other schools, they might think, well, when I'm looking for teachers, I ask for teachers with a degree and a Trinity Cert TESOL or a CELTA, so I'm assuming they're qualified, so I'll make them a titular. But it's really down to the school to decide. The school ultimately decides that, but they do have to have one titular.
One titular.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other problem, of course, is that when it defines a titular, it talks about qualified according to legislation, but there is no legislation.
Brilliant.
So in purely black and white terms, there has to be one in the school, one titular.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we're thinking about other positions within the school, for example, teacher trainers, academic managers, they fall under, they could be adjuntos if there is at least one titular. Is that correct? Or
They could be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Of course, there are others as well. The convenio does talk about directors and directors of studies, and they have an increase in pay. They also have to work 200 hours more a year as well.
Yeah. So I suppose one of the questions I have as well is looking at the difference between these classifications. There was a difference in salario base, I think it was, their base pay that's required.
Yeah.
So I suppose what would be the norm for people to be adjuntos, no? Adjuntos, auxiliar, titular. I suppose.
Let's have a look at what it says. I've got it here. I've got this horrible document here if you ever want to download it.
Yeah, I've actually got it here as well. So for those of us,
the titular, there is. Remember again, we're talking about all different types of training. So,
right,
profesor de taller, so a workshop teacher, and the auxiliar or adjunto is the same.
The same. Okay.
Yeah. Then they talk about instructores and expertos, educador social. The difference between an instructor or experto is it's a teacher who doesn't have qualifications, but is considered to have the knowledge necessary to do the job.
Right.
So it is vague, I know. But basically, the one thing that is very clear is a school has to have one professor.
Okay. And so for those teachers that come into the industry with no recognized qualifications, they could realistically be expected to take the qualification, the classification that says they don't have any qualifications. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess so. If they don't, the problem is probably the industry standard is a degree plus CELTA or Trinity Cert TESOL or something.
Yeah.
But don't forget, the sector is changing as well. We're not just talking about native teachers anymore.
No, we're talking about
so a degree in English from any university as well.
Yeah.
Would be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
So they might be the industry standard, but there's no obligation.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Within the document as well, it mentions permisos.
Yeah.
What are permisos? If just for those that don't understand what they are.
It just means leave, time off.
Okay.
Now there are different types of leave. One is, for example, if you get married, you get 15 days, and that's paid leave.
So these are paid. Is that correct? These permisos are paid.
Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Right.
You get married, 15 calendar days, so it's 2 weeks basically.
Yeah.
And that's paid. Let's see what else we got. And then there are some other things, like if you move house, I think you get 1 day, and that's paid as well.
1 day paid, right?
If a close family member is in hospital, I think you get a day or 2. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they're paid days. And there are other types of leave which aren't paid.
Yeah. And if teachers want to take these, if they feel the need to take these permisos, how do they go about asking their employer? Do they say that I need to take this, and their employer deals with the pay side, or how does that work?
Well, there's nothing really to deal with. You have to give a certain amount of warning. I think it's at least 15 days.
15 days.
I remember rightly. But no, you don't do anything. You tell your employer. They say okay or no. Although in some cases they can't say no.
Right.
In other cases they can. And it also, you can't have 2 or 3 people all getting married in the same week.
Of course.
No, you just get paid for that time, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so permisos, brilliant. That's a lot clearer. Now, one thing that still confuses me is the idea of mensualidades. This idea of 14 months, 12 months. I've seen some other contracts with even more numbers. What on earth are these mensualidades, and how does that affect us?
Well, okay, you get an annual salary.
Right.
Okay. That can either be divided up into 12 or 14 payments. And this comes from, it's an old Spanish tradition. And it's a bit patronizing, actually. Basically, they said, we'll divide your salary into 14 payments so that you've got enough money for holidays.
Oh, God.
So you get an extra one in the summer and an extra one at Christmas.
Okay.
But it's not more money. It's your salary divided into 12 or 14. And I think nearly everyone just divides it by 12 these days.
Okay. All right. So if they see 14 on their payslip, it's no sort of call for concern in that sense. It's fine.
No. I mean, I don't know of a school that does 14. I think nearly everyone does it in 12 these days. But
Brilliant.
It's the school that decides that, but I don't see any advantage of doing it in 14.
Okay, brilliant. Excellent. There's a part at the end of the document that looks at, it's like a table, la tabla de salarios.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now this is the minimum I'm not sure if this is the minimum for a full-time teacher that they need to cover for that classification every year. Is that correct, or how does it? So I think
for category number 1, which is basically teaching staff.
Is this? I think this is correct. No, this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the salary is 14,781 for full time, which is 1,446 hours a year.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Now they recommend a module of 34 hours a week.
Okay.
Now, one big difference between Spanish employment law and other countries is that they take always take the annual number of hours, and it can be divided up as the company wishes. So if one week you do 30 hours and the next week you do 38, that just goes to, it's not, that 38 isn't overtime, because you take the annual sum.
Right. Okay. That's interesting to know. That's very interesting to know. So, for example, if I work less hours this week, my employer could say by law that I need to work more hours the following week to make up for that.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And there's no sort of time on that. That could be done throughout the year at any stage, so they could call on those hours. Okay, brilliant. And so that's an important obligation, I think, for teachers to be aware of,
Yeah, I think it's something that's different to other countries. So it's a different cultural thing. So,
yeah. Okay, very interesting. Now, we did speak briefly about this before our chat, but the idea of training comes up in this document as well.
Can we finish talking about salary, because I think that's important. There are different concepts. There's the base salary, which we've seen is 14,700 and something.
Yes.
Then there are some other complements.
Okay.
The other complements there's the one for dedication, which is about 115 euros a month if you're full time, as well. And the other thing which we're going to go on to is the complement for training.
Right. Yes.
So, as you were saying, the convenio does oblige the school to provide training.
Right.
And if over a 3-year period a teacher does more than 30 hours, an average of 30 hours in total, an average of 10 hours a year of training, then there's an additional complement of around 36 euros a month.
And that's paid at the end of the 3 years, or it starts at the end of 3 years? How does
it starts at the end of the 3 years.
Okay, so you have to go through that 3-year period, do the 30 hours of training minimum, and then you start to receive that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you also continue training.
Of course, yeah. So that's really interesting. I think that most academies, I would hope that most academies do more than 10 hours a year.
I think most schools do at least an hour a week, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Or maybe not every week, but yeah, substantially more than 10 hours a year.
Yeah. Well, let's say that's what we're hoping everyone does.
Okay.
Okay, just have a look at my other questions here. Now, there is room for promotion within our sector. There's not, obviously, within academies, there's not a lot of areas, but for example, some teachers may become assistant directors of studies or directors of studies. And you mentioned before that there was extra pay for that, or I think there was even a mention of a lump sum payment within the. Is that correct, or am I reading that just completely wrong?
It's not a lump sum. It's a sum of money which is then divided up into 12.
Okay.
Into a monthly salary.
Okay.
So it's an addition to a teaching salary.
Right. Okay. And does that, in order to qualify for that, obviously you need to be working as a director of studies, but is there something that needs to change in your contract for that to be, I don't know, valid?
Good question. I would have thought so. It would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to be titular and then performing there
are different definitions of what a director of studies does, an assistant director and a director. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But the reality is that normally the roles of different people at that level are defined and negotiated between the school and that person.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Excellent. Very interesting, and cleared up many doubts that I had. There's still one doubt that I'm still a little bit confused on, and we were emailing about this. It's the idea of we often work with temporal contracts. So, for example, many teachers come, or many academies offer 9-month contracts, and then for the summer, many teachers, they travel or they work on a summer course and so on and so forth. Yeah. Is there an obligation for academies or institutions to change a contract after a number of temporal contracts, or
there is? Yeah,
there is.
But I'd also say, and another thing that's very important is in this autumn, we're expecting a major change in employment law.
Okay.
So if we talk about that, then we'll see the perspective of what's happened up until now.
Brilliant.
The changes that are most likely going to happen is that temporary contracts are going to be only allowed where it's a very, very specific project. So perhaps if it's a 3 or 4 week summer course, that might be considered
a temporary contract, right?
Yeah. Okay. So it's when it's very specific, there's a very clear time structure, then that's allowed. If not, it has to be what's called a Fijo contract, which basically has no time limit.
So if you're on, and as it is currently, is it after 2 temporal contracts you need to be pushed to a Fijo, or?
It depends on the interruption between. I think you're allowed to have 2 in the period of 3 years or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but generally the advice that we give to the association schools is to avoid temporary contracts because they're not popular with the Ministry of Employment, and if you get an inspection, you may well find that you're forced to change them to a fixed contract.
Wow. Okay.
So basically, if you're repeating, if you're working from, say, September to June, year after year, that's not a temporary contract. That can't be a temporary contract, even though it might be a chain of contracts. That's what they don't like. Okay.
So they prefer that as Fijo, no? They prefer to have a Fijo contract.
Fijo or Fijo discontinuo. Yeah. Right. Fijo discontinuo is where it ends and then rolls over.
Okay.
And starts again automatically.
And how does that affect academies in terms of, both teachers and academies in terms of pay or holidays? If I'm on a Fijo continuo, I imagine I accumulate a holiday pay, holiday days, and then I take my holidays, for example, in August, and then I'm back in September. Or how does it work? What are the nuances there?
What the convenio says is that you get 30 days holiday a year. And that's apart from Christmas and Easter.
Apart from?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you're working, and then those 30 days are proportional. So if you've worked, say, 9 months, it'll be a proportional part of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. I've been teaching in Spain for nowhere near as long as you, but you'd think after almost 5 years I'd have a good understanding of contracts. I still a lot of stuff I don't understand, and I think many teachers are in similar situations. But I think that we need to be aware of these things.
This stuff has to come out because we are working towards the very best practice. and trying to get rid of, getting away from this stagnation of salaries and stagnation of the whole sector in many ways.
Yeah. So I suppose, you know, we've looked at sort of the laws, and we've spoken briefly about best practices and from, you know, our opinion, what we would like. If you had some advice for teachers that are either currently working here in Spain, or maybe even thinking about teaching in Spain, maybe they're coming from somewhere else in Europe, or that they're thinking about teaching in Spain, what advice would you have for teachers when considering working in an academy or a language teaching institution?
Well, the first thing I'd say was look for a school that belongs to an association or to FECEI. One of the best places to look for work is Spainwise.
Spainwise, yeah.
Spainwise.net, because it only works with FECEI and association schools.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gives you a certain guarantee. And the other thing is that to get information about these contract law and so on, employment contracts, Spainwise is a good place to start. For many years, we've been doing workshops on this in Spainwise events, and these have been sponsored by ACEIA and FECEI. So get in touch with them; they can advise.
Right, brilliant. And what about for those teachers that perhaps are working in an academy now and realize that maybe they're not getting what they should be getting, or perhaps what they've been told of their obligations are maybe too much when looking at, you know, sort of what the convenio or employment law says. What could these teachers perhaps do?
They have to talk to the school.
Right.
There are mechanisms, but I think I once went to a talk by an expert in all this, and he was very funny about this. He was saying, okay, we've got this rule book, we've got all these laws, but if there isn't good faith on both parts, they're completely useless. The way to solve these problems is by talking.
Right.
So talk to the school. Show that you know what the convenio is, what your rights are, and hopefully resolve that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, let's hope that it does. I do. I mean, obviously, we're thinking what we'd like. We'd love for all academies to you know, follow these best practices, but in reality, perhaps things are quite different in certain situations.
Yeah, I mean, another thing is that working practice does vary around the country quite a lot.
Right.
So, for example, in the north of Spain, sort of working customs are slightly different. So, for example, they don't close at Christmas and Easter. They carry on working except for the actual holidays themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in the south, we normally close like school holidays. So it does vary from one place to another. It also depends on what type of teaching we're doing as well.
Yeah.
If you're doing a lot of business English, then they wouldn't expect to not give class during the school holidays. They would expect to continue. So all these things change.
Yeah. Now, we've spoken about sort of the employment law in general and the convenio. Are there any other sort of documents or things that teachers need to take into consideration?
Well, I suppose the big thing this year has been Brexit, which means that anyone coming from the UK who wasn't legally resident in Spain before the 1st of January 2021 will have to get a visa to work. Just in the same way as someone from the United States or Canada or Australia or anywhere else in the world would have to. So that's a huge complication, huge complication. Yeah. And it's certainly going to change the way we work quite a lot. Other things to take into account. I think another important thing is about employers' contribution.
Right.
We saw that the gross salary was 14,781, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Employers pay into the system 32% of that on top.
It's quite a lot.
It is a lot. And that goes towards your pension, to your health care, unemployment benefit. Hopefully we won't need that, but it's something that a lot of teachers don't take into account. But I can assure you, when you get as old as me, pensions become very important. So even if you're 25 or 30, it's really important that you take those things into account and make sure that you are being paid properly, and that your payslip, your nomina, reflects exactly what you're being paid.
Right. Yeah, you sent me through a video, a very, very clear video on sort of dissecting the parts of the nomina. So I'll make sure to put a link to that. And so, is there? I mean, employers, I imagine, are required to provide these or to put in these benefits. Is there a way that might not happen, or I'm not sure. It sounds like we need to check, but do we need to check because there's a way that might not happen, or it's just because there's something dodgy going on there?
Well, don't accept payments in cash which aren't on your nomina.
Right.
That's the main thing.
Yeah. It sounds so Wild West when you say like that. I haven't worked in a school like that for a while.
No, it was common practice years ago. It's something that is disappearing, but it's still around.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I think it's easy to think, well, maybe I'm just here for 2 or 3 years and I'm having a great time, and then I'll move on somewhere else. But in the end, every year that you work adds up to your pension.
Yeah.
And even a pension work that you money earned in Spain will end up in your pension pot at the end. Yeah. So take that seriously.
It's very important, definitely, 100% agree. Well, Alan, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you this morning. You have provided some very clear insights onto a document that is extremely vague and very difficult to understand. And so thank you very much for your time. I will leave a link to ACEIA and FECEI, Spainwise, and to the video for the nomina for those teachers interested. And hopefully, we can help teachers understand what they need to know and their obligations that they're required to perform as language teachers in Spain.
As you say, it is a very difficult document to understand. If teachers do have any questions, they can get in touch with ACEIA or FECEI, and we'll try and answer them.
Brilliant, excellent. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Alan, take care, and we'll speak again soon, okay?
Okay, good to see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.